Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching this stream on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Ganjing World. Today, I'm joined by Miss Kim Heller. She is a writer and author of No White Lies, Black Power and White Politics in South Africa. As you may know, last week, I have covered the allegations against South Africa, the quote unquote white genocide in South Africa. And we had a respected guest from South Africa who had a perspective, and the audience of Syriana Analysis was divided between agreeing and disagreeing. And I think this is a brilliant opportunity today to have with us Kim Heller to listen to a different perspective from South Africa. Kim, thank you so much for coming to the show. It's really a pleasure to talk to you today, to learn from you. And I hope you're doing well today.
Thank you. It's a great privilege to be on your very esteemed show, and thank you. And good evening to you and your listeners, viewers.
I think the audience of Syriana Analysis, I can read the live chat now. They're also excited about hearing about a country which plays an important role nowadays on the global scene, especially in the context of unipolarity and multipolarity, BRICS, NATO. And personally, I care about South Africa. I received invitations from friends and colleagues to move in South Africa. That would be an amazing opportunity for me as well to visit this beautiful country and do a road trip, basically, on the coastal line, which I've been obsessed recently and watching lots of videos. And I would say it's a very, very beautiful country, guys. And if you have an opportunity, you really should visit it. But today we're going to speak about history, politics, geopolitics with Kim. And I would like to start with you, Kim, as a person who doesn't know much about the complexities of South Africa. If you could walk us through the history of Afrikaans-speaking communities in South Africa. How did they come to settle there? And if they played any role during the apartheid era in South Africa?
Thank you. That goes back a long time. And what we saw in South Africa was what we have seen in the rest of Africa, that white men from foreign shores came to the continent with the intention, first in South Africa. The Dutch came to South Africa in 1652 with the intention of just setting up a fueling station. They were wanting to gain more control over the lucrative sea routes, but they stayed. They were never welcomed onto to the land, but they stayed, found lush land, and the story of colonialism began with Van Riebeeck in South Africa, as he plundered land, cattle, and other livestock from the indigenous people of South Africa. The myth of this being an empty land is just ridiculous, and it shows that history is often told from a Western perspective. So the story of South Africa under colonialism is one of land theft, of cultural dislocation, of subjugating the indigenous African population to almost second-rate citizens in their own country. And what we saw was that colonialism set up the architecture for apartheid, which actually legalized racial suppression and discrimination.
The argument that I'm receiving from different, let's say, experts or journalists from South Africa who deny the allegations against South Africa, they say that South Africa was basically an empty land. So the people arrived from Europe or from other places, and they have built it, and they have civilized the people there. And we also hear similar perspective when it comes to Palestine, saying this was an empty land there, and then the settlers arrived there, and they have made it like prosperous in the 21st century.
I think it's very important that we teach the audience and our children and children to come, generations that follow us, about history, because history is often told from the side of the victorious, and those that have been subjugated and whose agency has been taken away don't tell those stories. But historical facts show that Africans were in South Africa and across the continent well before the white man. But that's just, part of the dogma of white supremacy, that it's the white man, the savior, that's come to civilize, the uneducated savage. Yet if we see what has happened, not only in South Africa, but in the continent, is that the so-called civilization of the white man has been very savage. It's destroyed the lives and fortunes of millions of Africans. And as you said, the same situation in Palestine, that people have got the audacity to say that that was a land of the Jews, of the Israelis, when that land has always belonged to the people of Palestine. So we hear this tale, these lies of colonialism, actually, because what we're seeing in Palestine is once again a version of colonial power, where land, liberty, and sovereignty is taken from the rightful owner.
Actually, when we speak about history, nowadays we watch what's happening around the world. And to be honest with you, they are trying to distort the facts that are happening in front of our eyes, which we can see with our objective eyes. For example, what's happening in Gaza. And they refuse to call it a genocide. They refuse to call it an ethnic cleansing. They're always creative with creating new names for them: voluntary displacement of the people or relocation of the people into other places. And I come from Syria. I'm ethnically not an Arab. I was born and raised in Syria as an ethnic Armenian. And what happened, for example, in Syria after 2011 and now in 2024, which the chapter is closed, so they're writing they're writing the history of Syria, right? And I can see in front of my eyes how are they rewriting the history of the conflict. And myself, I have documented this before, but as you said, the victors always write the history. And therefore, I'm always suspicious about allegations coming from countries which have basically a consistent colonial behavior around the world. On one hand, they say, we're not subjugating the world. Now, the special envoy for the US to Syria, he says, the era of Sykes-Picot and colonialism in the Middle East is over. We will no longer intervene in the affairs of the region. We will allow the people to decide for themselves. And then Donald Trump sends 800 pages of demands to the new Syrian regime and telling him, if you want us to normalize ties with you, then you have to follow all these demands. So the problem is we're living in an international system that the people themselves cannot really resist this type of colonial behavior. They need the backing also from the outside. For if there is a bipolar system, for example, or a multipolar system, that would be a different case. But nowadays, if you resist the American, let's say, arrogance and dominance in the Middle East, they're ready to wipe out an entire population. And this is what they're doing. And they have done also in the past. So I come from this position of wanting the people to decide for themselves, but we are moving very rapidly, and I see that this is accelerating towards a world where the people don't have a say. They own nothing basically, and they have to show happiness for everything, and they have to celebrate being slaves, unfortunately. And I'm talking about financial slavery because the US has the grip over the dollar. There is the petrodollar, there is the SWIFT system, the banking systems, and everything. The US can weaponize it to force the people to follow and meet, let's say, the interests of the United States. Now, we are talking about white South Africans. And when we refer to white South Africans, are we talking about a single homogeneous group, or are there distinct communities with different cultural and historical backgrounds there?
That's a very good question, actually, because no, we're not a homogenous group, and there are different nationalities, and there have been settlers from all over the world of different religions, of different cultures, of different geographical tapestries. But I think at the same time, your question is quite interesting, because at the same time, we do have to look at white people as a homogenous unit, because no matter if I've come from Greece or I've come from Europe or Syria or wherever, and come to this country to make my fortune, as a white person, I'm still a privileged part of the system. I was part of the oppressor group, or my parents and forefathers, of a system that oppressed African people in their own country. And today we still remain, white people, no matter what your origin is and where you came from, highly privileged in a system. We own the economic wealth, we own the land. And something that I think we don't talk enough of is the cultural hegemony of whiteness in South Africa, because we control languages, we control just the cultural framework. And that, in a way, is it's almost like a cultural genocide of one's, or a degrading of indigenous languages and cultures. So as white people, no matter where we came from, we are all beneficiaries of the system of white supremacy. And in my book, I wrote, and a lot of people didn't like it because people don't like to confront uncomfortable truths. And I said, every white person, present, past, or future in South Africa, is a child of privilege.
Do you feel a responsibility, or let's say a moral responsibility, because of what happened in the past, which motivates you today to campaign basically and be a political activist and pushing against this type of behavior?
Yes, I certainly, I mean, I was involved in the anti-apartheid movement. I joined the ANC. I then joined the EFF. I'm now not part of any political organization, but I'm an independent political commentator, and I watch the dynamics of the country very closely and try and tell the truth, because the truth, in telling the truth, it's a revolutionary act in itself. And white people, I've actually wrote in my book, and for many years, I've said, dear white people, it's time to return the land. It's time to shed tears for the pain that you've caused Black South Africans for years. Even if it wasn't you, even if it was your forefathers, we need to give reparations for atrocities committed under colonialism and apartheid. But what I've found, sadly, is a lack of moral compass amongst white people. White people don't want to give up their advantage. They don't want to face up to the terror that they inflicted upon Black people in South Africa. So it's an endless journey. I'm forever being called a racial traitor, a black sheep, a factory fault is my favorite. And I think that, if being a race traitor means standing up for justice, then I embrace that label, actually. But there are very few white South Africans that confront privilege. And that's why a lot of people have now fled to the United States under the guise of being persecuted. There is no persecution of white people in South Africa. There's only what I would call illicit privilege and power, not gained through the white man being a superior species, but through subjugating and downgrading another race. That's simple as that.
I would like to bring not a counter argument, just to have a conversation with you about this case, and that is, now in the past 400 years, for example, let's say the collective West, with different names, whether it's Britain, whether it's Netherlands, whether the United States, they have been dominating the world. They have been going around the world and plundering and colonizing many places around the world. But before that, some may argue and say that there were also other empires. Like, for example, I myself, my ancestries were from Eastern Anatolia, where now it is Turkey, and back then the Ottoman Empire has ethnically cleansed the Armenian population, the Greeks, the Alawites, mostly Christian population. And they say those are not white people, for example. And now Turkey rejects to recognize the Armenian genocide. So the argument here would be, isn't this what empires do, basically? And since 400 years, yes, the collective West is practicing this, but before that, those who preceded this empire, they have done also similar practices.
Yes, but I think that was always in the pursuit of a world order that was reliant on imperialism and monopoly capital control over seas and land. And I think if we look back at that, it all goes back to the empire of the white man, actually. We have, for instance, African countries now that are fully independent politically, but still are in the service of the Western masters. So I track everything back to, to the white supremacy doctrine, and also empire building of any other nation at the expense of another nation. This is not good business or moral business. It's a matter of war and conquest, because empires have been built on the underdevelopment of other nations. And that is not humanity. That is not civilization or development, in my eyes anyway.
And nowadays, I think we are moving into a more dystopian level of imperialism, and that is based on data. And this is where the AI companies come, the tech companies, the Silicon Valley. They are basically collecting the data of billions of people around the world. They are manipulating algorithms. They are pushing certain content. They are hacking people's information. They're blackmailing people. The other day, I have read a lengthy investigation about basically spyware software, which was sent to Syrian army soldiers before the regime change happened in Syria. And the application was in the name of a humanitarian organization which existed in Syria. And the organization, which is now, it's just a front, it's fake, promising soldiers $40 per month as an assistance for their sacrifices that they are giving for the country. And many of the soldiers, they have installed this app thinking they will receive a reward. And this was a fake program, fake software, which has located every soldier, his name, his picture, his brigade, his unit, basically, which allowed the American side here to take over the country. So I think the future is the US or other imperial powers, they will not need to send soldiers any longer to other countries. They will create small proxy armies. They will assist them with data, locations, satellite images, and all this stuff. And they will try to overcome the challenges through indirect means. And people will forget about this because they will not be able to trace the origin of this intervention, unlike when you send boots on the ground, for example, what happened in Libya or in Iraq. And in this case, someone like Elon Musk plays an instrumental role in the data war, in the AI scene, for example. And he has expressed harsh, critical opinions about South Africa several times. He is South African. What do you think is the what does Musk really want from South Africa to begin with?
I think we have to approach this question from a number of fronts. The one is that he was born in apartheid and has kept that mentality. And I think there's a resentment about Black government taking over. I was saying on our own national television broadcast a few weeks ago that I think there's a lot of white South Africans who don't want to be ruled by Black people. And I would say that he would fit into that mentality. So there's almost like a emotional component and ideological and racist component to him wanting to have a presence in South Africa. And he's doing it in a very unruly way and disrespectful way, because he wants to come into the country, which we don't have a problem with, but he wants to supersede and disregard the rules of a Black control or a Black participation in the deals. Now, a lot of people have spoken about why there are laws in South Africa that seem racist. They're actually not racist. They are, they try and deal with the inequalities that we have seen historically in this country. And these are laws of redress. So for anyone coming into the country, we have stated that 30% of ownership has to be local, in local Black hands. And I think that's a very fair piece of legislation. But Elon Musk doesn't want to abide by that, which shows that he wants to come in as a typical colonialist, to come and dominate a country and not really give much back or allow it to be owned by the people itself. So what we see with him is, I think, an emotional, psychological component. But obviously, from a business perspective, South Africa is very important, as the African continent is. So I think to reach into this lucrative upcoming young market is absolutely critical for him. What we are concerned about is that Elon Musk has not shown that he's a patriotic South African. And with Starlink, we have to say, is that not a direct risk to our security and sovereignty? Picking up on the point that you made. So the abuse of information is part of the new warfare of today, as you see. So we are a bit skeptical, but there's nothing that prevents him to come in as long as he respects the rule of the land. And we're seeing increasingly across Africa, leaders are saying, you're welcome to do business with us, but on our terms. And to me, that should be respected. We are tired of the American US model and Western model of worshipping any businessman that comes in from the US or from the Western Hemisphere, Europe as well, and dictates terms of engagement with us. So we'll see how that unfolds. I also think it comes down to the fact that Elon Musk has got great ambitions, I think well beyond South Africa. He almost wants to control the world. And thinking about this question makes me think of the great Dr. Frantz Fanon, who said the white man wants to own the world. He wants to own every bit of it. And it comes to mind when I think of Elon Musk and what he's doing now. It's part of a bigger agenda, I think, on the geopolitical compass of South Africa, of the world right now.
I think it's quite obvious that Elon Musk is using data as a fuel. Nowadays, they say the data is the new oil, basically. And there has been great competition between different Silicon Valley companies over which company will have more access to data around the world. And one of the reasons why Chinese companies aren't allowed, or tech companies aren't allowed to operate inside the United States is this reason, because they are worried that China would use this data against them, something that they do all the time. This is a usual practice of the United States. So, however, in this case, what would it take for Musk to be able to receive a license for? Is the problem with Starlink itself, or because the ownership has to be 30% of the ownership has to be by Black Africans? Because this seems like unrealistic. How can you include 30% Black owners into the Starlink company if he wants to come and invest in South Africa? It seems more like he doesn't have a chance in South Africa for now.
No, he does. And I think in some respects, Starlink would be welcomed, because we have a very poor internet infrastructure. So from a technical point of view, that would be welcomed. From the point of entry, I think there's no real barriers for him to enter, but to meet transformation objectives. And there are many international players who've come into South Africa and respected that provision. And they're flourishing in South Africa today, and also benefiting Black entrepreneurs and business people. So to me, that's not a barrier to entry. And certainly, if he put any effort into making his businesses more beneficial to South Africa, he would not find that as an obstacle, but something that he would respect and appreciate. But he's certainly not doing that.
South Africa is also accused of white genocide. This was clear by the words of Donald Trump, who ambushed the president of South Africa. And there was a video I watched today, how many American media outlets were repeating this allegation. When I spoke with different guests from South Africa, he said there is no white genocide, but some of the components of the white communities in South Africa are probably facing cultural genocide or consistent violence for being a white farmer. Do you see that this is happening in South Africa? Is it complicating the situation there? Is this a racial motivated, let's say, attacks against the white farmers? Why is it happening to begin with? I mean, whether we say it is genocide or not, there are some data shows that attacks happened and are still happening against some white farmers in South Africa.
Certainly we don't want to disregard the pain of anyone who's lost a family member. And I'm certainly not doing that. But white genocide is a fake news in South Africa. And we saw the images that Donald Trump paraded in the Oval Office as being shown to be fake news. In fact, one image was taken of the Congo, where there actually is a real genocide happening. And people don't care because these are African people. So I think Donald Trump's obsession with white lives over black lives and other lives is something that the Americans must confront. There's no genocide of white people in South Africa. In fact, even figures show that of the approximately 26,000 murders that were conducted last year, about 44 at the most were farm attacks. And of those, less than a handful were Afrikaans farmers. Most of the victims were actually farm workers who tend to be black, actually. So you've taken, unless a handful of white lives is more important than the 40 or 60,000 people that have been killed in Palestine, this is not a genocide, but it shows the true colors of the US and Donald Trump and all those Americans and others across the world who are believing this fake news. Because underpinning that acceptance of this news, despite facts showing otherwise, is a valuing of white lives. And we found it absurd. I was saying on another station that it was so disgraceful that Donald Trump tried to embarrass an African leader in the form of Cyril Ramaphosa when he treated the monster leader of a genocidal nation, not even nation, regime entity, illegitimate entity of Israel, Netanyahu, with such respect. I don't know if you recall how he pulled out his seat and treated him as a VIP. Yeah. He didn't show the images of the people in Gaza being genocided. And we have to ask, why did he not do that? But when an African man, a president, a head of state, comes into the Oval Office, he parades pictures of white victimization. So that's why I always look at this as a bigger issue than what's happening in South Africa. I think we're seeing a very violent return to right-wing governments across the globe, and this all fits very nicely into that new narrative.
Donald Trump also played a few clips of Julius Malema's Shansi's was singing "Kill the Boer," and this still continues to stir controversy. In your opinion, why Malema continues singing this song? Don't you think this further complicates the political climate in South Africa, knowing that he's part of the government?
This has been such a big issue, and I can understand that people who are not in South Africa and who have not been part of the struggle against apartheid and the system of racism, they may see it differently. They may say, stop singing the song. But we need to understand why the song is being sung. Now, the song was sung not first by Julius Malema. It was sung by senior leaders of the ANC, I believe including Nelson Mandela, because this is not a song against the Boers. It's not a song against white people, and it's not a song against the Afrikaners. It's a song against the system of white supremacy. And when people are crying out about the song, it's as if they don't understand that. Now, why is it being played today still? And why is it relevant? And I wrote an article about this saying that the system of apartheid, although we have a democratic so-called black government in South Africa, we have economic apartheid, we have cultural apartheid, not against the Afrikaners, but against Africans. And the struggle for liberation is not complete. So for Julius Malema to be singing "Kill the Boer" is a cry for liberation from the system that oppresses them, which still keeps the land in the hands of 70% of the land in the hands of white settlers. So it's a legitimate song. And I also just to contextualize it, I was part of the EFF. I worked with the EFF in the 2014 election, and I attended many of those rallies where you see hundreds of thousands of people, or thousands of people, 30, 40,000 people. I attended those marches, I attended those rallies, and never once did I feel threatened. I saw today on our own newspapers or print that the head of AfriForum, or one of these people associated with the AfriForum stories, has said that there's not been, he does confess that there's been no link between the killing of the Boer song and people going out to kill, that there was an incident 30 years ago that may be related to that. So when I try and explain this to international audiences, I say it's not dissimilar to the from the river to the sea legitimate call for liberation that we see amongst the people of Gaza and Palestine. So perhaps it depends what side of the liberatory equation you're on to understand it or misunderstand it.
The problem is when you sing in English, the video will go viral, and you have hundreds of millions of people will recycle this video on social media platforms, and they will take it as he says, kill the Boers. I mean, in my opinion, there has to be some clarification, at least by himself, that he doesn't mean that, because now this will be used against South Africa. And I fear for South Africa, because when I see the president of the United States ambushing the president of South Africa, I think some psychological operations are underway, first against South Africa, destabilizations, and attempts to control the country through technology and through AI and through financial and economic means. Therefore, what I say, for example, because I also come from Syria, and I've been so tired telling my country and my people, like, try to close the windows. Don't keep the window open for the thief to jump in. And that's why I say, like, there has to be some sort of clarification to the international public, especially those who try to use now this song to intervene in the domestic affairs of South Africa. At the end of the day, Donald Trump doesn't represent the white people. He is not the president of the white people, like he's the president of the United States. But he is acting like he represents the interests of the whites all around the world. And this could set a precedent, because then in some other country, maybe they are persecuted whites, and then this will be an opportunity for Trump to intervene in the affairs, maybe even militarily. So do you think that South Africa has to do better on the PR scene, for example, because the optics are very important to sell the cause to the outside world?
Yes, I think once again, a spot-on question from you. And one of my criticisms that I had directly after the interview, the Oval Office ambush, was that I thought South Africa was very poorly prepared. And even Cyril Ramaphosa, who's got a very interesting personality, because he's very submissive to white people, actually, sadly. And he didn't have the strength of character to say to Donald Trump, this is not true. You know, he giggled nervously alongside that. So I think they did a terrible job to try and counter that, the lies. And, you know, he could have said, for instance, that the highest court of the land in South Africa said this is not hate speech, that it's understood. The people of South Africa understand that this is not a literal song. But I do think that it would create some discomfort in the world. To Julius Malema's credit, he's spoken many times about the song, that he's not anti-white people, that he doesn't want to kill white people or send them to the ocean, you know, to drown or to leave the country. And there are many videos where he's spoken about being up against the system of whiteness, not against white people. I mean, at the moment, there are many white people who are part of the EFF. In fact, one of the members of parliament is an Afrikaans man. So, when people look harder, they will see that these claims don't make sense. But perhaps another point, I think
Yes,
another
please.
point is that as you spoke, and you're asking such thought-provoking questions, it's an excellent interview. Thank you once again. But we have to say, isn't there a time when Africa actually isn't really interested in what the world says about it? That who is America to interfere in our affairs? And I'm hoping we get to that state, because many of our leaders go and curtsy, to these Western leaders. But there's things happening. We're seeing a momentum in Burkina Faso with the president, Captain Traore, who's saying, no, I'm not going to the White House and I'm not engaging with these people. And who are you to tell me how to run my country best? And the truth is that the West is not interested in the well-being of Africa. They're not interested in the quality of democracy. They're just interested in whether they can manipulate the leaders. So perhaps we should be less interested in the West.
I just want to say something about this because I have attended many think tank meetings, workshops, been to many mainstream media outlets. And I always genuinely felt that these American think tanks and research centers, workshops that they did for young Syrian leaders, so they're preparing us for our future democratic country, they come from the position of someone that they are preaching and teaching. And I found that very absurd, because for me, why would I allow someone from a different country to teach me how to govern myself? And this was my position from the beginning when the Syrian war started. And I said, look, I can count hundreds of criticisms against the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but I will not join the American and the Israeli side to tell me how the regime in Syria should look like. And therefore, I pushed against it. And of course, I was probably the only one among my colleagues and friends who continued on the path of collaboration with these think tanks and NGOs, etc. They got really fancy jobs. So this is part of you calling for economic liberation, right? So it's very difficult nowadays to pursue and reach to that goal when the money is in the hands of the empire. So, for example, I do this freelance job. My colleagues, they work for TV outlets or for as journalists in big newspapers, and they make, hell of a money compared to me. It becomes, at the end of the day, people have to choose between bread or turning a blind eye a little bit. And, they say, be diplomatic, don't be so challenging. But I think some people cannot do that. Some people simply cannot do that. And I think allowing this also comes from the position of this inferiority complex that we have to learn always from others. I mean, yes, I live in Germany nowadays, and I have learned a lot about the German culture and how they operate their society and their economy. And I think, and I believe that we should learn from the successes of Germany, for example. But at the same time, I truly believe that our social norms, our family relationships in our countries, and even some of the economies are built on to serve the people. Like in our countries, you have more time for yourself. A family of four don't have to work to afford a bread on the table. Things are becoming really ridiculous in more capitalized countries, that the mother and the father and the children and everybody has to go to work and then pay huge taxes, for example. And then this breaks also the families. And I believe they have to learn from us a little bit from when it comes to these issues, right? So I don't like to be preached. That's the problem with this type of mentality. You can act in a non-imperialist mentality with me, and I would accept your criticism and also your advice. But if you come and raising fingers like this, I think that is when the resistance starts. The resistance starts first from the heart and the gut feeling that you feel against someone like this. Therefore, I understand why many people in South Africa feel that way. The other day, I watched a video. It's a silly, funny video. They say it's the most dangerous neighborhood in Cape Town, and some vlogger is going there. And I had a South African friend here. She's white. She was here sitting with me, and she was watching, and she said, I have to tell you something about this neighborhood before you watch how dangerous it is, because back in the day during the apartheid time, the white settlers pushed the Africans into densely populated areas outside of Cape Town and on the suburbs, and this created joblessness and desperation and created more crime scenes. So we have to understand also the context of it. So that's why I want to know. So there is a problem, but we need to know the root causes of it, because now I truly believe that South Africa will be targeted, especially in the context of what's happening in Palestine. And this is where I want to lead the conversation with you. And that is, South Africa did the brave thing to bring Israel to the ICJ. This was something that encouraged me a lot to contact my friends and ask them, how can I move to South Africa? I want to raise the flag of South Africa outside my home, because that's the right thing to do, the most humane thing that any country could do. Does Trump really see this as problematic, as a factor to attack South Africa and claim there is a white genocide happening because he's also trying to defend Israel?
Absolutely. I think that is the question that everybody should be asking, because this is totally to do with South Africa's stance on Gaza. And I think he's almost terrifying the country into softening its stance. And we are being punished. And I do applaud the South African government for taking a stance, although I've argued it's not strong enough, because we should have declared economic sanctions on Israel. You know, South Africa today is a free nation, although we haven't completed the transformation fully. We have political liberation, but not economic liberation. But we would not be a free democracy today if it wasn't for the economic sanctions imposed by countries around the world. And, you know, Palestine was a great friend to the liberation movement, as was Russia. America sided with the apartheid government, we must never forget, and supplied arms.
Israel sided with apartheid, right?
Yes, Israel and the US actually were great friends of the apartheid regime. So we don't forget history. So for instance, when the Ukraine president landed on our land, he didn't get a great welcome by ordinary South Africans, because we don't forget who stood with us in hard times. So going back to the Donald Trump position, I always say that what happened behind closed doors after that Oval Office meeting is far more important than the optics that we saw. I do believe that within that closed door session, South Africa was asked to soften its stance on Gaza and Palestine. And sadly, because the ANC lost power last year and had to incorporate a white, very right-wing party into the government, the chance of South Africa softening its stance on Gaza is very high, because the Democratic Alliance, who are now the ANC's new partners in government, are Zionists. And in South Africa, we have a very strong Zionist call. And to some extent, I think the president listens to the Zionist voice far more than he should. So I would watch that space. I think we are going to soften our stance. There are even calls to trade, more with Israel, apartheid Israel, let me say. And that would be a great injustice, actually.
So the Zionist lobby has also an influence in South Africa. The other day, because I was doing some research about South Africa, and I came across a podcast. I totally forgot the name of the podcast, but they looked like two Europeans or Americans talking about problems in South Africa and Israel, and I found them, wow, like they were neocons. I was surprised to see that in South Africa it is a huge podcast. They're talking like they're Netanyahu basically from South Africa, and I was mind-boggled to see that. And it seems that the Zionist reach, because of the globalized world and digital world now, it's also spreading in different places, and also in South Africa. I had also very good friend recently I met after October 7 on Twitter X, and he wrote his history and story, how he was born and raised in a Zionist family and how he left that, and he supports the Palestine cause. So yes, there is also that. Finally, however, do you think that the WEF also has influence over the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa? Because I heard things and rumors that he's owned or he's a puppet of the World Economic Forum.
Yes, I think that there's been a lot of reports and allegations. I'm always wary to say until I have concrete proof of something. But if we look at Cyril Ramaphosa, the man, he's always been accused of being a puppet of Western imperialism. And I think that's really his trademark. And even in the ANC, he's taken the country in a more right-wing direction. He himself is a man who's made by white capital and business. And so he's very sympathetic to that. As an example, just to quickly speak about the Marikana massacre, which saw Black workers being shot down by the South African police force for merely asking for a living wage. Now, we know that the president was implicated in that massacre. It broke my heart because at that time I was an ANC member. But when I saw the ANC regime siding with the white international business over the well-being of its own Black workers, it broke my heart, actually, to be honest. And Cyril Ramaphosa is certainly very linked up with the Western business world. So I do believe he would sell South Africa to his Western masters. Let's watch this space. I think it could be a developing story.
That would be very unfortunate if it happens. Until then, I just want to mention to our respected audience that the links for our guest's book, No White Lies, Black Politics and White Power in South Africa, is in the description below. You can purchase it from Europe and from the United States. I put the links in the description below, so you can check it. You can read the description as well. And if you like, you can purchase them. In the meantime, I would like to thank you so much, Kim, for coming today to my show. This is the first time I'm having you on my show, and I would love to have you back in the near future when there are updates on South Africa. And maybe if you're interested, this is my very friendly recommendation or suggestion. We could also bring different guests and we could have a conversation between probably not like opposing opinions, but to have different opinions also on the show. I think that will be very rich because I can assure you, I've been covering lots of issues recently. And when I speak about what's happening in Ukraine or in Syria or in Palestine, usually people either mostly agree with what I'm saying. But when it comes to South Africa, there is like a vertical division, like 50-50. People are divided. So that would be very, I think, important to create a civilized environment for conversation between different people. So very thankful for you.
Thank you. I'd welcome that. And thank you. It's been such a wonderful interview. And thank you for all the work you do. And our love with the people of Syria. We stand with you. Good evening.
Yeah, I every time I hear Syria, it hurts my heart because of what happened to my country, and I cannot go back now. I'm exiled, and today Donald Trump accepted the demand of the current president of Syria to give citizenship to the Uyghur fighters who came from West China. Those are from the Xinjiang region to Syria. He will give 4,000 fighters Syrian citizenship, and he will incorporate them into the Syrian army. So foreign Takfiris can come to Syria and receive a citizenship, and myself, I'm an exile. Anyways, Kim, we will stay in touch. I will have you back on the show. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, guys, for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all. If you like this content, the simple thing to do is to hit the like button, subscribe. And if you like to support this work, the independent work I'm doing, there are different means in the description below. And I will see you tomorrow at the same time, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.